Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Aaron Jacobs podcast. I'm Aaron Jacobs, a former public school band director in the state of Ohio, now turned fitness coach. And today we are talking about fraudulent food topics that are popular on social media that drive me up a wall. Now, having spent some considerable time in this space actually helping people with their fitness in a full-time capacity, there are a few things that are very clear to me. Your social media feed is full of bullshit. And it's not complete bullshit. What you see are exceptional cases to the rules that are being made to be advertised as protocols for everyone to follow as a high priority. When it comes to fixing America's health, we've got to get the basics right first and have our priorities in order. It's not to say that things like seed oils, plant defense chemicals, or controlling your carbs, it's not to say that those things don't matter in any way. It's more about prioritizing what's most important. And if you are attempting to work on those things first as a part of your health journey, which is how many of those concepts are marketed to people by influencers, then you're really very likely to not get where you want to go. Let's talk about the basics. The average person just needs to figure out how many calories they need to eat for their goals, whether that's to gain muscle, maintain their weight, or lose weight. And most people are really bad at estimating their calories, which is why the average American eats over 3,500 calories in a day, which is why 42% of us are obese compared to 13% of us back in the 1960s. So this problem has more than tripled. Not to mention that doesn't include people that are in the overweight category. I know BMI is a bit of a weird statistic. If you carry a lot of muscle and you really are very physically fit, it's not the end of the world if your BMI is slightly over, but BMI does indicate that you're carrying weight versus your heart. And so if you have a higher BMI and you're not training your heart to support that, that's where we can have an issue and why BMI is still something that we should at least take a look at. But most of people that fall into the higher BMI categories, they're doing so not because they're very physically fit and muscular. It's because they are overweight, out of shape, carrying more body fat. So in America, the average BMI for people ages 20 to 29 is about 27 and a half. So not awful, but that's definitely in the overweight category because anything over 25 is overweight. The average BMI for people 40 to 49 is closer to 30. So as people go from their 20s to their 40s, very likely what we're seeing there is we're just engaging in the same behaviors that you quote unquote got away with when you were younger. All the bad eating habits, all of the lack of activity that because your metabolism is just naturally higher when you're younger. And that means that you can just kind of get away with some things that you just can't get away with as you're older. And so the younger you can start to incorporate healthy behaviors, the better off you're going to be. And that's why that BMI goes up. And then people ages 80 to over, it goes back to 27.6. But regardless, we're going to delve into three of my pet peeves that are popularized as like, these are three big hacks as to why your health isn't good. And especially for people that are feeling run down, are feeling a lack of energy, are feeling like they're not healthy and are feeling lost and don't know what to do. Some of these things seem like magic bullets that could work for you. And that's not to say that things like the carnivore diet don't have a little bit of merit in the short term. I actually happen to think that the carnivore diet done in a very small window, like a week or two, and then slowly adding other foods back in is a great way to do an elimination diet to figure out if particular food is causing you issues. But I don't believe it's a long-term lifestyle that you can adhere to. But we're not going to delve into the carnivore diet today. Today, we're talking about strategies and or things that people panic about in their health now. Those three things are: carbs are bad, and all sugar of any kind is bad. There's a whole crowd of people that think that. There's the people that, of course, that are obsessed with seed oils and think that every possible way you could consume a seed oil is terrible for you and that you need to avoid them at all costs or you're destroying your health. And thirdly, a lot of the same people that are fear-mongering about seed oils are also the same people that fear-monger about plant defense chemicals. You may not have heard of this stuff before, so if you do hear about it, now you'll be well armed with some knowledge to know that you probably shouldn't panic about eating vegetables. See, these things would seem like common sense to us, but when you start to make this shit more complicated for more people and you have all these extreme diets and you make a lot of foods completely off limits and you make it seem like getting healthy is really impossible. And I think a lot of people in the fitness space, because of certain ways that they live their life or because they can lift a certain amount of weight or because of a physique that they carry that's elite, whether that's because of elite genetics or because they've enhanced things with some juicy, if you know what I mean. Some people can really develop an ego about themselves. And there's this like, look at me, look at what I can do. And I do all these really awesome things that are hard to do, and that makes me feel good about myself. There's quite a bit of that in the fitness influencer space. I would say that doesn't tend to be a lot of coaches, but I will say people that are purely making their money off of producing content, having a great physique. That tends to be the crowd that will project this energy out into the world rather than making being truly fit and healthy seem more accessible to people. And so just from a philosophy standpoint, because especially most of my clients are teachers, they don't have time for bullshit, man. Teachers don't have time for this kind of bullshit in their lives. And they just need a simple, clear-cut plan to follow that makes sense, that is a joyous process to undertake, not having to worry about checking every single oil on the label of every single thing that they buy in the grocery store, or worrying if, oh God, if I eat this salad, am I eating plant defense chemicals? Like, it's so ridiculous. So we're going to take on the 3 most annoying food frauds, as I call them, hence the title of today's episode. For anybody that wants to come at me that say that these 3 things being fearmongered over caloric consumption is more important, you're full shit. There's nothing more important in America right now than helping people figure out how to control their caloric consumption. Here's an example. In 2010, a Kansas State professor, his name is Professor Mark Haub, embarked on a 10-week diet, and he primarily only ate snack foods like Twinkies, Oreos, Doritos, and sugary cereals. And he did try to eat some vegetables in front of his kids, apparently, while he did this study for 10 weeks, just to try to set a good example for the kids, because he's a professor of nutrition. But he was in an extreme calorie deficit. He was typically eating around 2,500 calories, and he went down to 1,800 calories of just junk food. Now, I know that I would feel like complete trash. I know that if I plugged my nutrition into something like Chronometer, which is a nutrition app that leans more into your micronutrient intake, making sure you hit your RDAs for vitamins and minerals. That's for my advanced clients who work into that level of understanding the nutrition, and for nerds like me, I would assume that he would have a lot of nutrient deficiencies on a diet like that. So he did have some vitamins that he took. He did supplement with a protein shake to make sure he got at least a little bit of protein. And he did have, of course, those vegetables around his kids. So here's the results that he had after 10 weeks. Of course, he lost weight because he was in a calorie deficit. Those of us that understand that nothing is more important in controlling how much of you there is on this earth is your caloric consumption and your consistency of adhering to a caloric intake that meets your goals. He lost 27 pounds. He reduced his BMI from overweight to normal, which meant that his heart was having to work less hard for him to just operate his life on a daily basis. Here's the other wild part. In eating mostly junk food and just a few vegetables and a protein shake, his cholesterol levels improved. His HDL cholesterol increased by 20%, and his LDL cholesterol, which we often consider the bad cholesterol, it's a little deeper than that, but generally speaking, the LDL cholesterol is the one that you want to keep a little bit lower. He decreased that by 20%, eating mostly junk food, and he reduced his triglyceride levels by almost 40%, eating mostly junk food. So anybody that wants to come at me and tell me that there's nothing more important than caloric consumption for most Americans, you're full of it. There's a nutrition professor that has proved it right there. And yes, there are things that affect the calorie in, calorie out equation, for sure, because nutrition is never a one-size-fits-all thing. It's stupid to focus on these instead of calorie balance. Seed oils. Well, first of all, there's this term, have more healthy fats. Well, what is a healthy fat? A healthy fat to me is just a fat that is not common in the standard American diet. Most people, when it comes to getting their fats in America, you're getting it from animal fats and butters and probably seed oils. And really what the issue is, we did a deep dive on this in my seed oils podcast, so you can go back and listen. But basically, most Americans don't get enough of a variety of fats. Most people experience, if they have a lot of seed oils and they experience inflammation, it's not necessarily just their seed oil intake that's causing that. It's the excess calories that cause weight gain, because a lot of times seed oils and processed foods that are easy to eat a lot of, which drives your calorie consumption way up, those two things go hand in hand. What we really need is a balance of omega-3 fatty acids to what most seed oils are, which is an omega-6 fatty acid. So if you include more things like high quality extra virgin olive oil, and especially if it's high quality extra virgin olive oil, try not to cook it or cook it at very low temperatures so you can maintain all the nutrients in that oil. You can include more things like fatty fish from good sources like wild caught salmon. And of course, avocado oil. I cook with avocado oil at high heat all the time because it includes omega-9 fatty acids. It really is just about finding a balance for most Americans. So seed oils in and of themselves, not deadly. Not to mention, they have some anti-inflammatory properties so long as you have a balanced diet. So American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that higher levels of linoleic acid, which is a common omega-6 found in seed oils, is associated with lower chronic disease risk. Not to mention, consuming unsaturated fats found in seed oils can reduce your LDL and thereby lower your risk of heart disease. And that's from the British Journal of Nutrition. And even the Cleveland Clinic right here locally says that seed oils are safe when they're consumed as part of a balanced diet. And the real culprits are, as I've said, and thank you, Cleveland Clinic, the real culprits are often the overconsumption of processed foods, which lead to overconsumption of calories. Number 2, carbs are bad because they have sugar in them, and sugar spikes your blood sugar and your insulin. Well, okay. Some people do feel fuller on lower carb diets. And to be fair, I strategically use lower carb meals to this day. So there's some merit to this. Just like saying that seed oils are bad. It's just, no, most people just have too many seed oils and processed foods and not enough other kinds of fat sources to balance their diet out. When it comes to carbs, a lot of people are just having carbs that are easy to overeat. You're having the highly processed carbs. If you have complex carbs that come from vegetables and tubers like potatoes, which potatoes actually the most satiating food on the planet, potatoes are your friend. They are not your enemy. What's nice about a low carb diet though, and what I use strategically for a low carb meal, is that I eat a lot of eggs, a lot of protein, a lot of vegetables in the morning with a little bit of a cheese, like sometimes feta, Parmesan Reggiano, sometimes a low-fat mozzarella. I will say, I do feel very full for hours when I have that high protein, higher fat, and lower carb breakfast. And I start my day with that pretty commonly because of that. But I know that if I'm going to hit my top peak performance in my workouts, that I need to make sure I'm having carbs and that carbs are not demonized. And I will say that there are some people that, when they have their experience with carbs, it's because they overeat the processed carbs. It's understandable why you can feel that way. And so a lot of people are triggered by overeating, and they know, like, okay, if I bring any sort of processed carb in the house, I'm going to eat too much of these. And maybe I could see this happening with grapes potentially, because grapes are pretty high calorie for their size. Maybe. But the amount of people in America that are overweight because they're eating too many grapes is probably not nearly as high as the amount of people eating fast food too often, DoorDash too much, and eating ultra processed foods from the grocery store. I just can't imagine that those two numbers are very similar. And here's why you need carbs. Carbs are actually your brain's preferred source of fuel. The brain primarily runs on glucose, and unlike your muscles, the brain can't actually store glucose. So that constant supply of glucose will help. And a lot of people that go to a low carb diet all the time, and especially carnivore, the brain fog starts to hit, and they say, well, just have some more electrolytes. Yeah, okay, sure. If the brain primarily runs on glucose, and especially because I've been able to lose weight just strategically using a low carb meal in my day and not to go low carb all the time because I still want to perform my workouts, that's what has certainly worked for me. And most people do not need to cut out carbs altogether, because a lot of times that means cutting out a lot of joy and a lot of foods that you like that actually might benefit you. There is also some evidence to suggest low carb diets negatively can impact memory and cognitive flexibility. Carbs also can play a role in serotonin production, which is our feel-good neurotransmitter that helps regulate our mood. Low carb diets can be linked to higher rates of irritability, anxiety, and even depressive symptoms. Carbs are they're just faster energy for people. Your body converts it to what's called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, and it can do that much faster than it does with fat or protein. The process to convert fat and protein into glycogen to use for energy, which then glucose, that goes to ATP, that's called gluconeogenesis. That process takes a lot longer than just having your carbs and then having that sugar go into glucose, which then goes to ATP. Also, your muscles, as I said, unlike the brain, your muscles can store that glycogen and have it ready for use in your next physical activity. Carbs also have fiber, vitamins, and minerals that are unique to them. You're not going to get a ton of vitamin C on the carnivore diet. Not to mention there could potentially be a deficiency in something like folate, which is vitamin B9, magnesium, fiber, vitamin K2, potassium, iodine, even omega-3 fatty acids. There's a lot of disadvantages and potential nutrient deficiencies that are very apparent on the carnivore diet. There really is no great way based on strict carnivore to get vitamin C other than supplementation. So as long as you just prioritize fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and beans, don't fear carbs. And lastly, let's talk about plant defense chemicals. Oxalates and phytic acid. Oh no. Phytic acid and oxalates are naturally occurring compounds in plant-based foods, and they are sometimes called quote-unquote anti-nutrients because sometimes they bind to some minerals and reduce the body's absorption. But for most people, if you just have a balanced diet, really not a concern. In a lot of cases, you can just decrease these by cooking your food and not eating all of your vegetables raw. First one's phytic acid. If you've never heard of this, phytic acid is usually found in whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and can bind to things like iron, zinc, and calcium, which can potentially impair their absorption. But if you have a well-rounded diet, you really have nothing to worry about. And in fact, phytic acid has been associated with other health benefits, including being potentially an antioxidant that can help you fight cancer. Oxalates are present in foods like spinach, beets, nuts, and even chocolate, which can bind to calcium and can form insoluble calcium oxalate crystals, which might contribute to kidney stone formation. So people are fear-mongering this for the general population when only really specific people need to be concerned about this. But just like phytic acid, oxalates have been linked to some health benefits, antioxidant, and anti-cancer properties. So again, these three things, they are marketed by some people to everybody as if everyone needs to be cautious of these three things. Don't eat any more carbs, plant defense chemicals are killing you, and seed oils are the worst. And I'm really tired of that bullshit. Why don't we do this first, food influencers? Let's teach people how to eat the right amount of energy that they need on a daily basis to steadily lose weight. Let's help them build a plan to lift weights and progressively overload. Let's help them find ways to eat more protein in their diet, to encourage them to get more steps throughout their day, and to eat on the perimeter of the grocery stores. Until we can get everyone to understand their energy balance, to move away from ultra-processed foods that lead to a consumption of way more calories than a person needs on a daily basis, there's really not a lot of reason to talk about things like seed oils, plant defense chemicals, and being anti-carbohydrate for the average person. So let's stop majoring in the minors, especially during the holiday season, because this shit's already confusing enough. Thank you all very much for listening to the Aaron Jacobs podcast, talking about my 3 least favorite food frauds on the internet that are popularized by social media influencers. Everyone take care and be well. And enjoy yourself some carbs.